Hey everyone, welcome to Science-Based Fitness. My name's Adam. Thanks for stopping by. Today's video, we're covering the 4 most important keys to building muscle. One of the most frequent questions I get from beginners all the time are about these topics. And even for people that have been training for years, it's important to make sure you're doing these properly. Now, as I go through these topics, I'm going to touch on some data and research and try to back these topics up. So without further ado, let's take a look at number 1. The first aspect we'll look at is load. Now, I started with load because I feel like these build upon each other, and it's important to know the correct load you should be using. When we discuss load, it's going to reflect the number of reps we can perform. The number of reps that you can complete will depend upon how heavy of a load you're actually using. Now, there are 3 rep ranges that are ideal for weightlifting. The first is for strength, and that's a typical rep range between 1 to 6 reps. This would mean you're using a very heavy load. And then we see size, which is hypertrophy, which is between 6 and 15. This would be a rather moderate load, and then muscular endurance, which is 15 plus reps. And this would be considered a lighter load. So this is where we hit our first crossroad. You need to know exactly what you want to be training for. For those trying to maximize hypertrophy and get bigger as fast as possible, that rep range between 6 and 15 is more ideal. So this is where we turn to research. Greg Nuckols wrote a review on different studies and systematic reviews that looked at hypertrophy, and it's a very good read, and of course I'm going to link this in the description as well. And essentially his personal takeaway here was this. For the amount of work that you'll be putting in, you'll see better hypertrophy lifting between 6 to 15 reps. How much? Maybe a 10 to 15% advantage. Now, of course, there's going to be overlap, and those getting stronger will also be getting bigger, and those getting bigger will also be getting stronger. Now, I did make a full-length video on rep ranges. If you guys want more information, I'll link that at the end of this video. But I think this leads really well into our second topic, which is intensity. So in other words, how hard do we actually have to lift? A lot of people will lift to failure every single time they pick up a weight. And is that bad? Not necessarily. I think as long as you're not sacrificing form to a point where you're putting yourself in harm's way, you're probably fine. Or maybe if you're doing really dangerous exercises to failure like box jumps. I had to just throw that in there. So a study evaluated 4 groups and looked at which one experienced the most hypertrophy. Of those 4 groups, 2 trained to failure and 2 groups trained shy of failure. Of the 2 groups that trained to failure, 1 group used lightweight and 1 group used heavyweight. And of the groups that trained shy of failure, 1 used a heavyweight and 1 used a lightweight as well. And it wasn't much of a surprise, but 1 group fell behind in the amount of hypertrophy they actually experienced. And that was the group lifting light loads, stopping shy of failure. Whereas the group using light loads, training all the way to failure, actually saw the most, reinforcing the intensity matters and the load matters too. So we'll be lifting close to failure with a rep range of 6 to 15 reps. But this is only half the puzzle. We need a little bit more information here. So let's move to topic number 3. And that's gonna be rest. Rest is one of my favorite topics, and people make tons of mistakes when it comes to having the appropriate amount of rest time for your specific goal. According to the National Academy of Sports Medicine, recommendations for those trying to get strong should be at least 3 minutes of rest. Those looking at hypertrophy should be resting between 0 and 60 seconds between sets. Now, of course, there's some nuance here, because 0 seconds really is only applicable in something like a drop set. That's something I'll mix in more as a finisher of a muscle group, maybe just to mix in a little bit more volume at the end of the workout. A meta-analysis looked at 35 studies and was able to conclude that 30 to 60 seconds does yield the best hypertrophy results. Part of this has to do with those shorter rest windows having an acute increase in growth hormone. Now, as a personal trainer, I think it's important to put safety at the forefront of the way that I train my clients and the way that maybe you should train yourself. If you're doing heavy compound movements, training close to failure, doing things like deadlifts, bench press, shoulder press, squats, I think those type of movements are a little bit more physically demanding, and maybe adding an extra 30 to 60 seconds of rest won't be the most detrimental thing to your workouts. Training single joint movements in smaller muscles, I think you're much safer using those shorter rest windows. You're in a less vulnerable position, and you're less likely to be injured training a bicep versus a squat. But these rest periods are important. We need to make sure we replenish our ATP stores so that we have enough energy to actually contract our muscles. Now we want to get into the 4th and final component here. Now I went with both volume and frequency because I feel like you can't talk about one without talking about the other. Now let's say we're trying to grow our pec muscles. How many sets should you do? Well, knowing how many times you're going to frequent the gym training that same muscle is important. Ideally, training 10 to 20 sets a week should be sufficient. For more advanced individuals, training closer to 30 sets a week might be ideal for you. Now, of course, the variables we already discussed go into this. Your intensity plays a big role. Someone that's training very intensely can probably get away with closer to 10. Someone that's training with a low intensity can probably get away with doing 30 sets even if they're not in advanced training. So if you're someone that's going to be training chest twice a week, I think it's important to take a look at the total amount of volume you're going to have for a week. Let's say we're trying to hit 20 sets. How should we structure this? Let's say Monday we decide to hit 12 sets. You might be already hitting 15 sets or 20 sets in that single week on that single workout. But now we can train with a more appropriate intensity, a more appropriate load, and more appropriate rest time. This should make for a more optimal workout. And then let's say on Thursday we're fully recovered and we decide to hit another 8 sets. But we're still going to be optimizing hypertrophy gains by increasing our training volume and frequency. And I threw a source in the description if you want to read a little bit more about the appropriate volume. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Feel free to hit that like button. That video I talked about on number of reps right up here, and I'll see you guys next week. Oh yeah, hit that subscribe button and hit that like button. We'll see you guys.